right radial aircraft engine in the back, and an air cooled engine upright in the back of the tank. And like most American tanks in those days, it was to a forward gearbox and then into front-mounted drive. Something you won't find on any British tank except our very lightest one.
One thing about the American tanks arriving in the desert, we often look at history, we tend to kaleidoscope and look at the end of the war when obviously a tank like this was no match for the larger German tanks. When they first arrived though, British soldiers called this tank a honey because it was so lovely, so reliable, and that's something to remember. These were considered, the American tanks, fantastically good, reliable, easy to work on compared to so many of our own tanks which had chronic unreliability problems early in the war.
Right, now the next tank coming on is a Valentine, one of the British tanks from the middle part of the Second World War. Again, it's an infantry tank. It was classified as the Infantry Tank Mark III, but because it was very versatile, they tended to use them as much as cruisers and everything else. It's fitted with a suspension invented by Sir John Carden, which he called his Bright Idea suspension. It's powered by a General Motors diesel in the back. This is a later version with a larger 57mm gun, and normally they had a two-man turret and a very uncomfortable one-man driving position. But they were remarkable tanks. They went on to use, supplied them to the Russians. A number were built in Canada, and they were supplied to New Zealand and other armies. It was quite popular in their day, but they meant to get out fast later on. Without the ground clearance, and they needed
This particular version going round, this is a later in the production.
And a 76mm gun, but with the 85mm you've got 3 men in the turret. A characteristic of the tank is the sloped armour, both at the front and the sides, which the Russians always claim to have invented, and it's been around a while before that. The tank has a version of Christie's suspension, meaning that each row wheel is independently sprung on coil springs, but with large flat plate tracks to deal with the snow. Powered by a V12 diesel engine in the back, and proved to be quite reliable. It was built in huge numbers because, as David said earlier, the Russians regarded tanks as expendable, and they were in huge numbers for that reason. It is actually, if you go up close, pretty crudely made as well, but that never worried the Russians. They weren't trying to win prizes for beauty. They wanted loads of space machines. That was the best way of doing it.
One of the things that's often pointed out is that crudity of Russian vehicles, but famously when a T-34 was captured outside Moscow, taken to Berlin, and Albert Speer, the German armaments minister, got all the German tank designers to look closely at the T-34. Initially they were hugely scathing because it seemed so crudely engineered, but there was a time when the Russians actually drew up plans to or the Germans actually drew up plans to copy the T-34 because they realised it had such good qualities such as the sloped armour, good wide tracks, ideal on the Russian front where you've got mud, snow, very few metalled roads. But in the end, being the Germans, they thought they could go one better, and they end up building the Panther tank as really a response. Don't forget, often a myth, it wasn't the T-34 that led to the Tiger being built. That's amazingly that because the Tiger bumped into, sorry, not the Tiger, but the Germans bumped into the British Matilda tanks in France in 1940 with that thick armour we just saw in the early Matilda. That caused Hitler to initiate the factories with different capabilities. So sometimes you get cast hulls, sometimes welded hull vehicles. Later in the war they put a bigger gun on, such as a 76mm gun that's on this particular variant of Sherman, and they up-armour them and they make just under 60,000 of them. And for the American war plan, it worked. They threw their engineering ability and money at the problem when the war came along, and don't forget, they were on the winning side. Now this particular Sherman going around, this is the Tank Museum Sherman, and this is the one that was used recently as the Fury in the war movie The Fury. And we've left all the kit on it, so it looks like it's kitted out as it was in the film.
It's worth pointing out actually that the Sherman in question is the 76mm there with a long gun and the enlarged turret, but it's actually powered by a pair of General Motors diesels. Now the US Army during the Second World War would have nothing to do with diesel engines at all. They decided on petrol and petrol it would be. So the diesel engines were only used by the US Marine Corps in the Pacific. So in that sense it's actually the wrong tank for the film, but it's also available. And I think the film was about the crew and their survival in the tank more than anything else. And that really showed up well. Brad Pitt was the star. So that's going round now. You'll also notice it has a slightly different suspension. That came on later, involving horizontal coil springs to produce what the Americans call an easy 8 suspension, whereas the early ones had vertical volute springs.
Now with any luck we'll be seeing these three Shermans later on in the afternoon because they'll be taking part in our battle. As with all our Sherman tanks, as with all our...
5mm gun in a conventional turret. It's an all-welded construction. The Americans were very keen on and did very well. And like all the other tanks, eminently reliable. And the diesels will go on forever. In fact, they're absolutely amazing. But they were used by the British Army quite a lot in the Western Desert and in the sea and so on. But not never by the American Army, they could help it. They had an abhorrence of the went for the petrol engine version. They had a version of the 48, probably the most reliable of all. The worst of them, who was said to be the version M404, and a concentrate price for it, at the size of the price and cost around 10 drive after. And that engine,
variations that you can see in the Sherman tank, and continuous improvement, and also different factories had slightly different ways of putting the tanks together or locally produced add-on parts.
I suppose one of the things we could point out is the white star painted on the side of the turret, although it's generally reckoned to be an American recognition sign, it was. And by the time of D-Day it becomes universal to British and American tanks. So you see British tanks with white stars painted on them as well. And it became the sort of semi-official Allied recognition sign. So when you see a white star, don't automatically assume it represents an American tank. It can be a tank in British service with the star painted on it just the same.
And this particular Sherman, the last one now leaving the arena, this one was actually came from the Belgian army or Belgian stocks after the war, and the current owner restored it almost to, as you can see, almost as he's described, factory fresh condition. Again, it's appeared in the Fury movie, and so far, I always don't want to tempt fate, but he's actually had very reliable driving. He went on a whole 150-mile trip in this particular Sherman up through Holland on the retracing the 30 Corps route, liberating Nijmegen, Arnhem, etc. So 150 miles of trouble-free driving, which is another thing to remember about the Sherman tanks. They were on the whole fantastically reliable, and of course also the other great thing about them, replacing parts, working on them was so much easier than some of the other vehicles at the time. Now what we're going to be doing is getting those vehicles into position, because we'll be seeing them a little bit later on in our battle scenario, so they'll be moving off in a slightly different way to most of the other vehicles we saw earlier.
made, but whether it was really worth it is a questionable matter.
Now, following behind our Kettenkrad, you can see our Panzer III coming on. This was a vehicle, again, captured in North Africa. We know a fair bit about this Panzer III. It was taken to the UK, evaluated, lots of reports written on it, and some years ago the guys in the workshop had a refurb on it. It was always kept in running order. You may see some photographs in older books. Sometimes it was painted, as sadly some of our vehicles still are actually, in rather erroneous colours, but this has now been put back to the colour scheme it was when it was in service in North Africa. It's what they call a Tropen vehicle. TP was stamped on the manufacturing plate, and that meant it had been adapted specifically for use in North Africa in dusty conditions. They changed the air filters on the back. Good example of the Panzer III of German tank design. They went through many years of trying to get their tank design right after Hitler came to power in '33, and the Panzer III, Panzer IV were the tanks that they aimed to go to war with. Panzer I, Panzer II were really the German training tanks. Panzer III starts the war with a low velocity 30mm gun. This particular model, the L, has got a much more powerful, higher velocity 60mm gun. Again, beautifully engineered, it's very finely made, very quiet engine. If I stop waffling for a moment, you'll probably hear how quiet it is. And this particular vehicle has some battle damage on it still, and is in a remarkably original condition.
Well, if you could hear it, it's got a Maybach V12 engine in the back. I should stress, by the way, that all German tanks, or almost all German tanks anyway, had petrol engines. They didn't have diesel. And the Maybach V12 in the back of the Panzer III is a petrol engine. And again, like most American tanks did, it drives through a front-mounted gearbox to a front drive sprocket and has torsion bar suspension running all the way along. That's quite typical of the German tanks. All welded construction, usually with side doors in the turret, which was regarded as a weak spot, really, if you could hit one at all. But it's those characteristics that make it outstanding and get the make the Germans sort of think quite remarkable in that sense.
One of the reports we have in the archive that the School of Tank Technology, when they looked at the Panzer III, they admired the crew layout. Commander's in his own cupola at the rear of the turret there, but in battle, in the stress of battle, they admired the fact that the commander was in eye line with both the gunner and the loader.
Captured in Tunisia in a battle with Churchill's a 48 RTR, and we've restored it, or we've had it restored to running order. And it's quite impressive sight to see as high as we're going. But that's the real thing. That's the tank that probably terrified more British and American tank troops than anything else. The idea of running into one of those was something they didn't relish at all. Again, it's powered by a Maybach V12 engine, and it was done really to because they wished to standardise on something. It was against the wishes of Hitler. Hitler wanted them all to have diesel engines and decided that's what they laid down a decree that that's what they were going to have, but no one took the blindest bit of notice from it. It's fitted with extra wide tracks to deal with soft conditions, but those tracks are so wide that if you move the tank by rail, you have to take those tracks off, take off the outer set of road wheels, put on special narrow tracks which will be able to fit on a railway wagon at all. Has torsion bar suspension, and the road wheels actually overlap and interleave one another, so that they cover as much ground as possible.
Now, as you're probably aware, Tiger 131, it was captured in Tunisia, brought back to the UK, evaluated, lots of reports written on it, and it came to the Tank Museum in 1951. And we started a programme back at the end of the 90s with help from the lottery, from prison funds, individuals, companies. They helped us get this back into running order, which wasn't easy because as part of the evaluation, the tank was taken apart at least twice, we think, and the original Maybach HL210 engine, which we still have in the museum, was sectioned as a teaching aid. So we actually had to use a HL230 engine that we had a spare, and that was what was refurbished over time. Many ups and downs in that process, but at the moment, after a number of years, we've still got the only working Tiger One in the world. And it's 6 real Tigers left, a 7 to 6 put together out of kit, and it's now in the German Tank Museum in Münster. It's privately owned, it's on loan there. So it's a bit of a rare beast. 1,300 Tiger Ones were made during the war, but of course an awful lot of them, as we were making the point earlier about...
And then section after that, they really got too heavy. Take just 5 bank through, 3 men in the turret and 2 in the front of the hull, and it's armed with 77mm guns. Well, cut down
Comet's got a fantastic engine though, that meteor engine. You may be able to see on the rear there's 2 little fishtail exhausts, but basically there's no silencer at all, and so you get that lovely rumble of the big